Hello, welcome to the Sound of Science, the place where we deconstruct unscientific bogus and silly scams. Let's go get them.
I'd really like to know then why it is that in the popular imagination this assumption has developed that intellectualism, scientists and philosophers and the academy is sort of tied up with atheism.
Hello, you wonderful fellow critical thinkers. Thank you so much for watching. Last week I made a video called What Happened to Alex O'Connor. In that video, I shared my idea that Alex O'Connor, one of my all-time favorite YouTube atheist heroes, appears to have shifted his style and tone lately. In my opinion, Alex used to be rather clear in his stance towards science and religion, and specifically towards Christianity. I believe his point of view has always been that science is the best tool we have in order to find out what is true, and there is no convincing evidence that demonstrates the existence of a God. I think this has always been how he views science and religion, and I fully support this position. But lately, I think I see a change in the way Alex conveys his message. First of all, I see more and more videos on Alex's YouTube channel, in which he hosts all kinds of speakers who get the chance of telling their story, with only little critical response from Alex. He remains silent and nods now and then, even when his guests are Christian apologists who proclaim nonsense and often use questionable methods to bring about their message. Of course, it's up to Alex himself to decide what kind of videos he makes. Luckily, Alex, the guests he has on his show, and people like myself, we are mostly living in countries where there is freedom of speech. I fully support the right of freedom of speech until the point where people use their speech to trivialize, justify, or encourage violence. Yes, that means that Christian apologists should have the right to spew their nonsense on YouTube, and Alex O'Connor should have the right to host them on his channel while silently watching how they produce the kind of rubbish that Alex used to actively refute a bit more than he seems to do today. Do note that that same freedom of speech gives me the right to criticize these Christian apologists and the right to criticize Alex O'Connor. And by now I think some criticism towards Alex O'Connor is appropriate. Letting Christian apologists talk nonsense for minutes on end without interrupting them could be seen as an act of being polite and respectful towards other opinions. But that could suggest that addressing their nonsense during a conversation would be impolite and disrespectful, and therefore should be avoided, which doesn't seem right, because we just agree that criticizing people is also part of free speech. You've got the right to speak nonsense, and I've got the right to call you out for that, and the other way around if needed. So, giving intellectual pushback towards people who talk nonsense is not disrespectful. It is just exercising free speech. And it even is the kind of free speech that serves a very important objective: educating people in critical thinking. If we let people talk nonsense without pushback over and over again, their nonsense will be normalized over time. That is why we have a flat earth society. That is why some people think that rocks can talk. That is why some people believe that vaccinations are Satan's work. They've been exposed to nonsense over and over again without being taught to critically assess these things. In order to bring progress to any society, we need to give pushback to nonsense. For if we don't, society will gradually fall back intellectually. Not addressing nonsense will make society dumber over time. For the past decade, Alex O'Connor has been one of the strongest voices on YouTube, pushing back religious and anti-scientific bogus. But to circle back to the starting point of this video, I think his tone seems to shift. He sometimes offers a platform for Christian apologists to make unproven claims without any rebuttal. He sometimes uses thumbnails and titles for his videos that almost seem to promote religious slogans. And when I analyze some of his videos a bit deeper, he sometimes even suggests to agree with questionable and unscientific statements made by his guests. To demonstrate this a bit more clearly, I will analyze a clip of a conversation between Alex O'Connor and John Lennox. John Lennox, of course, being a former Oxford mathematician, who's kind of seen as one of the most prominent Christian apologists. So let's see what really happened during that conversation. So let's do this.
I'd really like to know then why it is that in the popular imagination, this assumption has developed that intellectualism, scientists and philosophers and the academy is sort of tied up with atheism. That, once you become a bit intellectual and you start learning about stuff, and if you actually read the Bible, you'll be talked out of all of that. We've already talked about how you think that's just untrue, but then why that association in the popular mind?
Yeah, so I repeated the same question here that I played at the beginning of this video, because I think you need to listen to this at least twice to let this sink in. What is going on here? Let's cut some of the non-essential words from this question and see what happens then.
Why it is that in the popular imagination, this assumption has developed that scientists, the academy, is sort of tied up with atheism.
Really? Well, that's a strange question. What Alex is doing here is presenting the idea that academia and science is tied to atheism is some kind of assumption, a popular imagination. How is it possible that people seem to think that the more educated and scientific you are, the bigger the chance that you are or become an atheist? How is that possible? Well, Alex, how about facts? This is not an assumption. This is not an imagination. It is reality. And we can demonstrate this easily with simple facts. For example, a large-scale survey in the United States in 2009 showed that 41% of American scientists did not believe in the existence of a God, while at the same time, only 4% of the general public in the US didn't believe in the existence of a God. The more you are a scientist, the less you believe in the existence of a God. That is just simple facts. Alex, you know this, but what you're doing now is framing this fact as just an assumption, just an imagination, thus spoon-feeding Lennox his narrative that there is no contradiction between science and religion. Alex, this goes way beyond respectfully giving the other side an opportunity to display their point of view. What you're doing here is actively facilitating and even promoting their point of view. I don't understand why you do that.
First of all, in this country, there has been media bias, I believe. Mm-hmm. There's much more communication of atheism.
What? Media bias? That is Lennox's explanation for the supposed assumption that science is tied up with atheism? And then Alex says, which is kind of a signal that Alex feels no need to refute this. Media bias? So this darn media has been talking the poor people into atheism. That is your explanation for a wrongly framed phenomenon. And then Alex even lets you get away with not presenting any evidence or even an argument to back this up. Really? Doesn't either one of you see that the exact opposite seems to be a very reasonable explanation as well? More people become atheists, so logically, as a result, more people in the media are atheists, and that reflects in the way the media operate. So more attention for atheism in the media perhaps is not the cause of more atheism, but the result of more atheism. Why would that not be a good explanation? Both of you didn't think of that?
And also, the idea that is either consciously or unconsciously perpetuated by some scientists that science is the only way to truth, which we call scientism. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of people around here that believe that. Peter Atkins, whom I've debated several times, and you must know very well, holds to that view. And to my mind, it's almost amusingly false. Because the statement, science is the only way to truth, is not a statement of science.
Yeah,
and
right,
therefore,
right.
if it's true, it's false. It's logically incoherent.
Excuse me, what? Alex, again, you let John Lennox get away with this. You see, Lennox is now walking a very thin line of shady reasoning. Lennox is taking the context out of the statements that Peter Atkins has made in the past, making those statements look more questionable than they actually are. Sure, Atkins has said that science is the most reliable way to truth, and even in some cases that science is the only way to truth. Yes, Atkins has indeed said that. But first of all, when Atkins says that science is the only way to truth, the context, of course, is the systematic study of the world around us. Atkins does not claim that science is the only way to truth in daily life. When I want to find out if it's true that it rains, there is no need for me to start up a scientific research program. I just look outside and observe the weather. Another part of the context is that science is the only reliable way to truth that is available to us now. And you, John Lennox, or anyone else in the world, has never presented any alternative method to determine the truth that is more reliable than science. That is the context. So from that perspective, science indeed is the only way to truth, because you don't have a reliable alternative. And you don't need any label for that, such as scientism. All you need to do is to come up with a better working system than the scientific method. That is the way of demonstrating that science is not the only way or not the best way to truth. So, I'm waiting for your suggestions. Yet another part of the context is that Atkins is not referring to the future. Nobody knows if there ever will be a better path to truth than science. Who knows what will happen centuries from now? Atkins is referring to the here and now. It's just like making the statement Elon Musk is the only man worth more than $400 billion. If I make that statement, I do not have to provide the explicit context that statement is about here and now. You obviously understand that I do not mean that there can never be another man being worth more than $400 billion. I also do not mean that there can't possibly be another man worth more than $400 billion, but who has been mysteriously hiding in the dark without the rest of the world knowing it. Such a thing is not impossible, but based upon the information we have available now, the statement that Elon Musk is the only man worth more than $400 billion is completely justified. The same applies to Atkins' statement about science being the only way to truth. Nobody ever presented a more reliable alternative. So science is the most reliable way to truth that is available. John Lennox knows all of this, does not address the context, and Alex lets him get away with it. Why? Why not address these issues in a polite way? What Alex is doing now very much looks like Alex agreeing with these rather hollow statements of Lennox. And of course, that is how these clips are going to be used by those who like to discredit science for years to come. You now see how subtle John Lennox plays his game of softly discrediting science in just one or two sentences in a way that will cost me 5 minutes of explanation to expose it. Alex had all the time in the world to do this, but he chose not to. Okay, well, let's see what else is going on.
I can't explain it any more than perhaps there's also an element of the zeitgeist, where the culture is at.
Yeah.
Remember that John Lennox is now still in the process of explaining something that does not exist, but helps him to gradually dismantle science and atheism. Yes, this is still the part of Lennox's explanation of why the public is imagining that the more scientific you are, the more atheistic you are. Again, that's not imagination. That is just a fact supported by clear data. Thanks to the suggestive question that Alex threw at Lennox, Lennox now gets the chance to explain something that is not there, but does fit his narrative.
And I talked to Christopher Hitchens at great length about this, and he took the point in the end.
Now this is where the supposedly nice, calm and respectful Mr. Lennox clearly crosses an ethical line. Hitchens totally disagreed with you on many points, and for very good reasons. But Christopher Hitchens is dead. He cannot push back anymore on anything you say about him. Yet here you are, Mr. Lennox, claiming that in your conversation with Hitchens, you had such a good point that Hitchens in the end accepted it. With these tactics, you reshape the legacy of Hitchens without him having the opportunity to correct you. And if there ever was a moment for Alex in this interview to interrupt Lennox, this was it.
Well, what I said to Christopher, Christopher, I don't understand you, because if you'd really understood what Jesus said and said to the religious rogues that were around him, you'd be on his side, not fighting against him.
This is turning into a pretty crappy spectacle. Lennox shamelessly suggesting that he schooled the great and late Christopher Hitchens on not understanding Jesus, and Alex O'Connor quietly nodding, while he had every opportunity in his own video and on his own YouTube channel to provide context, or to at least mention that Hitchens is not here to tell otherwise. So, allow me to say what Hitchens could have said. Hitchens could have said, "I don't give a crap about your silly and mortal Jesus. What matters is your disgraceful and violent God, who thought it to be a good idea to murder the entire world population for no reason. Anyone who tries to justify that deserves my contempt, including your Jesus."
That the one thing you cannot do by force and violence is impose truth.
Excuse me? The one thing you cannot do by force and violence is impose truth? Well, that is exactly what your God is doing all over the Bible. Believe my truth or I will kill your entire tribe. God did it by flooding basically everyone in Genesis. He did it to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. God did it to the Canaanites. Over and over again, the biblical God tried to impose his truth by applying force and violence. So, Lennox, what are you talking about? And Alex, you let him get away with this as well?
Especially if it's truth about salvation, peace with God, forgiveness, a new life, and all this kind of thing.
Yes.
Yes? Alex, that is your contribution to this conversation? Yes? Lennox just shamelessly promoted Christian propaganda, claiming his God and Jesus exist and represent truth, without presenting any evidence that his God exists in the first place. And all you say is, yes? Was there any specific reason for you as an atheist to say yes? Alex, wouldn't it have cost the same amount of energy to just say no?
That my fellow countrymen who took up arms, whether on Protestant or Catholic side, to defend Christ and his message are not Christian, because they're disobeying what Christ said, not following him.
Yes.
Well, Lennox, your fellow countrymen who picked up arms and went to war in the name of their religion perhaps did not follow the example of the Jesus character in the Bible, but they did follow the example of your own violent God. And he is the one who's ultimately in charge, isn't he? Besides, Lennox, you're a Protestant, so you believe that Jesus is God, which means that Jesus is the same character who murdered millions of people in the Bible. So your fellow countrymen who waged war against one another were actually following the example of Christ. And if Jesus both has murdered millions of people and tells us to spread love, then perhaps Jesus is a bit confused and needs some mental guidance.
And another thing I often say, well, the existence of false coinage doesn't prove that the real stuff doesn't exist, but may make it hard to find.
Oh, sweet mother of Gandalf. Another example of totally shady reasoning by Lennox. Alex, you do see what's going on here, don't you? The existence of false coins does not prove the real coins don't exist. Come on! Of course, Lennox is saying this in a religious context. So, for example, the existence of false prophets does not prove that the real prophets do not exist. But this coin example is a silly language trick. If we talk about false coins, we already have established that real coins exist because we have compared the false coins with the properties of the real coins. That is how we know they are false. Therefore, this is a circular statement that proves itself. But if you bring this matter back to what Lennox really means, then his argument falls totally apart. Imagine a man comes along. He claims he will turn water into wine. Turns out he's an imposter. He was hiding a glass of wine under his robe. What would be your first idea? This doesn't prove that people cannot turn water into wine. No, you fool. It doesn't prove that people can do it.
I've been prepared for the last 70 years or more to be vulnerable. In other words, I'm always prepared to question what I believe.
No, you're not. Because throughout your entire life, nobody never ever presented you sufficient evidence that proves the existence of your God, yet you still believe your God exists. Lennox, if even the lack of evidence for the existence of your God cannot bring you into a position of doubting the existence of your God, then nothing will. You see, there's a lack of evidence that talking rocks exist, so you don't believe in talking rocks. There's a lack of evidence that flying unicorns exist, so you don't believe in flying unicorns. There's also a lack of evidence that your God exists, yet you keep believing in your God, because that is what you've been taught as a child. It is imprinted in your brains. You will never question the existence of your God, no matter what will happen.
I agree with people like Justin Briley when they say that, I don't know if the statistics bear this out, but I can kind of feel something in the air, like the conversation's shifting a little bit.
Yes.
Alex, what? You're now promoting the work of Justin Briley, who is basically a Christian apologist? And your method of choice to determine if something is true now is that you can feel it in the air? Never mind statistics. Let's not be bothered with facts. I can feel it in the air. Alex, what the hell is going on?
And why was it so difficult for someone like Christopher Hitchens to see that all of his criticisms were journalistic? They were about religion as an institution on Earth.
And this is where the interview reaches its unfortunate climax in a way that I've never seen before from Alex O'Connor. He's basically handing Christian propaganda on a silver plate to John Lennox. And he's even spreading untrue statements about Christopher Hitchens. No, Hitchens' criticisms towards Christianity were not all journalistic objections against Christian institutions on earth. No, Alex, you know very well that Hitchens had profound problems with the basic principles of Christianity as written down in the Bible itself, no matter what Christian institutions and their minions did with that. Christopher Hitchens very clearly and strongly rejected the Bible itself, stating the God of Leviticus and Deuteronomy is a genocidal tyrant. Hitchens also said the Bible contains so many contradictions and absurdities that it is a wonder anyone takes it seriously as a historical document. End of quote. Hitchens clearly showed his contempt for the Bible itself on numerous occasions, regardless of what some church clowns do with it. How can you dismiss this and go along with Lennox as a team effort to alter the thoughts of Christopher Hitchens? What are you doing? What is going on here? Two gentlemen who appear to be very decent and polite, disfiguring the legacy of one of the greatest atheist thinkers of the past century, who is no longer here with us to defend himself.
Looking back, Alex, I wish I'd had more time with Hitchens. I liked Hitchens.
Mm-hmm.
How would you like it, Mr. Lennox, if after you're no longer with us and no longer capable of defending your own legacy, Alex would tell the world, well, I had this long conversation with Lennox, and it was such a shame that Lennox didn't understand atheism. But in the end, Lennox finally understood that his God was just an illusion. Oh, but I liked Lennox so much. How would you like that, Mr. Lennox? Is that the way that you want to be treated yourself? It's very sad and disappointing. Thanks for watching.